Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, after reading that SolarWinds is the number one in network management software, beating out big names such as IBM and Cisco, etc., combined with the mouth-watering stat that it serves over 300,000 customers that include 498 out of the Fortune 500, I thought to myself, why has it taken me 2,100 interviews to invite these guys onto the podcast? But today we're going to change all that, because I've invited the company's head geeks, Crystal Taylor and Sasha Geese, to talk about what observability can do for network administrators. And I also want to learn more about SolarWinds' new Hybrid Cloud Observability Platform that I've been reading a lot about recently. So we've got a lot to get through. So buckle up and hold on tight, because through the wonders of technology, I'm going to beam your ears to the US, Germany and the UK all at the same time, so you can sit down and enjoy the conversation with me and the gang at SolarWinds. So, a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do, and maybe share your origin story of what ignited your passion for tech, or what put you on the path that you're on today? And Crystal, I'll let you go first.
Oh, yeah, I love being first. So I am currently a head geek with SolarWinds. I have been for about 2.5 years. And prior to that, I spent about 9-ish years operating as sort of a monitoring engineer inside of customer environments as a contractor. So, lots of different environments, lots of different things going on. And that's really my origin story. Before that, I worked in retail. So I didn't work in tech at all. I didn't have any formal training. I just kind of jumped in with both feet and ran with it.
Love that. And one of the reasons I asked that question is 9 times out of 10, people didn't set out to work in the tech industry. Mm-hmm. There's a few little happy accidents that happen along the way. And Sasha, what's your origin story?
Well, actually, I'm a little bit longer in SolarWinds, a little bit longer a head geek, and I actually worked tech jobs before. But a couple of years ago, I had a chance to make my hobby my profession and started working for a gaming company. And since then, traveled the world and somehow ended at SolarWinds, where I work since 2014. So quite a few years, actually, yeah.
Fantastic. And that path obviously led you both to SolarWinds, which I believe serves over 300,000 customers, including 498 of the Fortune 500. And that alone is a mouth-watering stat. But for anyone hearing about you for the first time, can you just tell them a little bit more about problems that you're helping businesses with?
So the types of problems that we help people solve are really, the idea is to save everyone some time and some money in the end of the day, right? What we want to do is provide them the ability to be proactive with their environments, with their setups, their applications from end to end, monitoring it, making sure that they know what's going on, and, saving them time, saving that, which ultimately saves businesses money, which is what everyone wants.
And before you came on the podcast, I also read that you recently launched the Hybrid Cloud Observability Platform, which is the first platform that the company has built from the ground up since the SUNBURST supply chain incident that targeted SolarWinds and other technology companies last year. Can you tell me more about this and the story behind this solution?
Sure. So the Hybrid Cloud Observability is kind of an evolution of a platform which we started selling 15 years ago, the Orion platform. And Orion was kind of like a modular system where users went for, I need network management, I need application control, whatever. So they built their own system. The HCO, or Hybrid Cloud Observability, is a little bit easier to understand. It's kind of a package that comes with pretty much all of what was previously a modular approach. And yes, this is the first product that came after the incident, which happened in December 2020. And we used this incident to really look into how can we improve security as a company as a whole, but more importantly, how can we improve the software building process? And we don't have that much time, so let me give you a short overview. In software development, each vendor goes for the best practice. And best practice is something that came out of experience over time. And in development, this means we have like developers who create code and they send their code snippets to like a compiler, like a build environment, whatever you want to call it. And that is an automated system that converts the handwritten code into machine-readable executables. And what happened at SolarWinds is this part of the build environment got compromised. And unfortunately, each time we sent new code to our download servers, malicious code got added. Okay. So what we did is we invented something, or we came up with something which is called Secure by Design. And we have multiple build pipelines now. So in a nutshell, there's a coder who creates code, and we ask those guys to create documentation. That is a half automated, half manual process. And there's another team sitting basically in a separated environment who recreate the code based on the documentation. And there's a third team who is always checking the integrity of both code production lines, to call it that way. Mm-hmm. And that way we can bypass any problems that happened in the past in SolarWinds. So it's a pretty new system in software development and something that we are actually quite proud of, and it's an industry first.
And as I said a few moments ago, 498 of the Fortune 500 companies you've worked with. For the other two, what are you thinking? If you are listening to this podcast, you've got to get that full 500 there. But for business leaders listening outside of that list, or anybody just curious about what you're doing here, what does this solution offer businesses, would you say?
Sure. So Hybrid Cloud Observability offers, an integrated solution that will help them face their challenges, right? There's more and more IT complexity with all these hybrid environments and partially in the cloud and all of that, right? It's getting more and more expanded. And one of the things that we do is that we provide insight into all of those various environments, right? And pulling all that data together so that you can be more proactive, save time and money, as I mentioned earlier. I think it's really important. We have less budget and more responsibility is falling on, even developers, right? They need to have end-to-end visibility into the apps that they're creating. And that's really important, right? They're responsible for making sure that those things stay up and running. And our technology helps you do that.
And I think we've all seen so many big changes over the last few years. And one of the things that we took for granted, of course, was the supply chain, the global supply chain. We quickly began to see empty shelves, and it really hit home how we've took that world for granted. So can you tell me a bit more about your mission to greatly reduce the threat of those supply chain incidents that we've witnessed over the last few years?
Well, as it happens, we were kind of, abused in this scenario, right? Because we were in the supply chain. And it is quite obvious that as an organization, you really need to check who you work with. And that is contractors, that is temporary employees, that is other suppliers, whatever. So if you the other way. So you only have control about your own environment in regards to security. So you need to trust on those third parties. So it's always a little bit difficult, and quite often organizations don't even know what third parties have access to, right? So what resources can be accessed from outside. So it's a good idea if you work with any contractors, et cetera, to really sit together with them and check what can they access, what do they need to access, what do they do to keep their own environment as secure as possible. And at some point, there's a shared responsibility between the business and the third party. And it's a challenge for both parties, and it will only work if they go together as a team for such an exercise.
And speaking about our setup internally, we're leveraging red teams, and we've adopted zero trust, and we're enforcing multi-factor authentication for basically everything. So just more and more steps that you can take along with risk assessment, and obviously access assessment, which Sasha just mentioned, needs to happen, not just for external access, but also for internal access, right? Make sure you're doing assessments of who has access to what when they change teams. Are we reassessing what they need access to? I think those are really important security practices that everyone should undertake.
That is actually true. The other day, I sent a time off request, and I needed to use my phone for multi-factor authentication. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's between convenience and security, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It really is. And of course, I also got to highlight that both of you have incredibly cool job titles. I'd love to see you heading into passport control and explaining that. It's just incredibly cool. And as this is a tech podcast, I'm going to give you both a chance to geek out here. So, Crystal, can you tell me more about the tech behind the solution and what excites you about this tech?
Yeah, so it's really exciting for me. My previous role before I joined SolarWinds, I worked for a SolarWinds partner. So I actually have been around the software for a really long time, and I'm always really excited to use it. I always like to say that if I can learn how to use it in like a week as someone who had no previous tech experience, then anyone can learn how to use it. And I think that's one of its greatest assets is that it is easy to use, it's easy to understand, and you can just get in and start making progress and have that visibility, have those connections made right between all of your data. It looks nice. You can make it do whatever you want it to do. If the data is in there, you can make it look however you want it to look and help you solve those problems. I mean, I don't want to be working on nights and weekends, and my goal always was helping people to also not have to work nights and weekends if possible. So that's what I'm really passionate about. And we have something that we're working on that is coming up is journeying more into AI ops, and that's really exciting to hear about and learn about how we're getting more into the machine learning and the AI ops to improve everything so that we can do even less ourselves, and so that we can, use automation and leverage our technology to make it easier for those people who are using our software.
Love that. And what about you, Sasha?
Well, Crystal mentioned pretty much everything that's important, right? So it's really nice to see how our products grew over the past couple of years, which is important because the requirements of businesses change too. And I'm not sure if you are aware, so each year we ask our customer base what is pressing matters right now. And this year, we asked them what bugs them most, what is the most difficult challenge at work. And the result is pretty much the growing complexity. And it's pretty cool as our product fits into companies on their journey to the multi-clouds, digital transformation. Okay, it's a bit of a buzzword, but yeah, it's still out there. And so we fit in everywhere. That's nice for a small organization who maybe has a few branch offices and like a legacy gear, whatever. We talk to those tech. If there's a company who is really high-end, modern, distributed application delivery, whatever, we talk to the hyperscalers. We talk to simple things, Office 365 with PowerShell. You can do this manually, absolutely, but you spend 1 week to set up simple queries, right? So we have support for that out of the box. And I think what is really interesting here is something that we work on for quite a while. Many problems and businesses are homemade. There's the silos, there's different teams, there's the network team, application team, cloud architects, yada, yada, yada. And they don't really talk to each other. And in many organizations, they don't even like each other. When there's a problem, the first question is not how to fix it, but who has to fix it. Mm-hmm. And we bring those people together. As Crystal just mentioned, we have nice dashboards and we bring the people together. They have access to the same data, and we have features in the tool basically to put them with the nose to the root cause of an issue. And that is pure gold in daily business and IT.
And I think the most dangerous phrase in business, especially when we're talking about things like technology, cybersecurity and innovation, is, but we've always done it this way. So a question I'm going to ask both of you here is, what keeps you up at night? And how do you personally keep your curiosity and open-mindedness alive? And Crystal, I'll throw that to you first.
Sure. What keeps me up at night could be detailed by a lot of things. So there's a lot of things recently, which are not even in tech, which keep me awake at night. But I think that the world can be a scary place, right? I mean, there's a lot of things going on. It can also be a very lovely place. So you kind of have to take the good with the bad, right? It's one of those things where, the incident was like an interesting time, right? I mean, it was interesting working for the company during something like that. I'd never been part of a company where something like that had happened. So for me personally, like that was really just a learning experience. And I think what keeps my curiosity alive is just there's always new things going on in tech, right? There's always something going on, something changing, some new technology that's coming out. And I find it really interesting. There's just always new things to learn, and not just with new technologies, right? I mean, I'm super intrigued by everything that's going on to make automation easier and to ease that path, right? So that we can do a little bit less, so we can do a little bit, have that less responsibility, right? There's more and more responsibility being put on individuals. And that was reflected in the IT Pro Day results as well, where they were, less confident in the ability to hire people, or, there's hiring freezes going on and all that. So more responsibility falls on the individual. And when that comes, automation is super helpful, right? It saves times. You can do things with it that will allow you to not have to do everything by hand yourself and not have to work until 2 a.m. every day and all that. And I would never wish that on anyone. I think that as a culture, we've become kind of inured to working so much in the tech industry. And so it's really nice and interesting to see people kind of learn to not have to work so many hours, right? So that kind of keeps me going. I like to anything that is increasing kind of that efficiency and saving individuals time, which, in turn saves everyone else, right? Saves businesses time, saves money, keeps things up. And, we have less patience for the waiting as it were, especially with everyone, kind of going virtual over the last couple of years. Is there's even less patience for waiting for things to load or waiting for things to get accomplished. And I think that breeds improvements to efficiency and automation, right? Because we need to answer the call of that impatience and improve those things. And that area is just continuing to become more interesting. We're continuing to innovate as a tech culture to improve that.
100% with you. And Sasha, it's such a fine balancing act. So especially when what keeps you up at night, how do you stay curious and be more accepting and embracing of new ideas and new technologies? Anything you'd like to add on that?
Well, I tend to get lost in technology. It's like playing with new toys, with a new Lego set or whatever, right? So, for example, I'm slightly ashamed. I recently discovered Google Cloud Platform. Okay, just ignored it, and I was always dealing with AWS and Azure. And now I spend a lot of time in GCP. Just what does this do? What does this do? Oh, this is cool. This is cool. This is kind of like you have to be curious for a job like Crystal and I do, and you can only do this if you're really interested in technology, right? You can't. It's different from selling fridges, to say it that way. Mm-hmm. And it's just nice to build stuff, to break it and try to fix it again. But yes, this is kind of like a way. There's no SLA in the background, It's different if it's your job to make sure everything keeps running. For me, it's like a playground. Play with technology, learn, and the knowledge you gain is something that you can apply when talking to customers, for example.
And there are so many big tech buzzwords out there at the moment. Some are arguably overhyped. Some are beginning to converge and create exciting opportunities. But Crystal, are there any particular emerging technologies that excite you at the moment?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned it a couple of times, but what's going on in like AI and machine learning, where they're continuing to innovate in that space, and just, I know it's not like super new, but they're continuing to innovate there and continuing to find new ways to automate things. And I think that that's really interesting, seeing the technology that can detect things like anomalous behavior and all that. I'm really passionate about monitoring. So that is an improvement upon that, right? Where it's not taking an individual person to go check disparate sets of data and determine what's connected and what's not normal and all of that. Anything that improves upon that is really interesting to me. So I like to do that because it's easy for me to see how it can be applied in the day-to-day. And I think that is a really good space. I think there's really cool technology out there that is a little bit more difficult to see an application for me, like in the day-to-day. So I get really excited about things that are going to apply to just general IT pros, right? Like seeing how the machine learning determines what is anomalous, for instance, or, what is different? What correlates this data together? How did you determine that? I think that's really interesting because until recently, we've done all of that pretty much by hand and by personal sight. And so that's just it's like watching a technological revolution or evolution, as you say, right? You think about, it's when you sit down and think about where technology was 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever. And then now where we are now and where it's going, you can kind of see the future. And I think that is just really exciting.
Yeah, completely with you. And Sasha, is there anything you've got your eye on or something that excites you?
Oh, it's pretty much very similar. Crystal mentioned with AI ops. The thing is, AI is as you mentioned earlier, it's like a buzzword that's around for many, many years. And quite often organizations tag something with AI, which is just, smart baselines or whatever. So it's interesting to see the real use cases. And we see them for a few years now. What we still struggle with is making such technology affordable and easier to use. And that is something which we see going on for, maybe 1 year, maybe, 18 months, merging AI with the likes of low code, no code. So basically, people who are able to build flowcharts are able to create the background for an AI application. And there's a lot of happening in that kind of market space. And I find that really interesting.
Well, we started the podcast today talking about your origin stories. So as we come full circle, I'm now going to ask you both to look back. And Crystal, to begin with, what would you say the biggest lessons have been that you've learned throughout your career in tech?
I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is to apply anyway, right? I mean, You may not have the skills, you may not have what's on the listing for whatever job it is. You may not know anything about that technology, but try anyway. I think it's really exciting. It took me a long time to get to a place where I was confident enough in my own ability to learn and adapt that I could take on a new task without having prerequisite knowledge. I mean, that's what we do. We learn, we adapt, we overcome in IT. And if you are so inclined and you enjoy the IT space for that, then I think it's a great time to give yourself a little bit of guidance and give yourself a little bit of trust that even though you may be less than confident, maybe you don't think that you can do that job, and there's that voice in your head that says that you can't, that you definitely should try anyway. I think it's really important to give yourself a little bit of a boost just to try. What happens if you fail? I mean, it's not the end of the world. It took me a long time to learn that sometimes we're going to fall on our face, and the important thing is what you do after. And that is advice I could give to anyone coming into tech. It's very scary to work with someone or work in a production environment, and you think if you mess up that everything is going to end and you're going to lose your job and all this stuff. And sometimes that may be true, but at the end of the day, what you do afterwards is more important. What did you learn from that? Where did you take that? How did you improve upon it? How did you react to that situation? Those are the important parts of it, not the failure. I think the failure is very important, and that you should try anyway.
Yeah, I completely echo everything you said. That's so important. And Sasha, if you were to sit back for a moment and reflect on your career, what would you say the biggest lessons you've learned are?
I find it quite interesting that both Crystal and I, whose jobs are kind of like technologists, consider non-tech as the most important lessons. Yeah. For me, it is actually to just take a step back and make sure you're not going to burn out on your job, because that is a terrible situation. And unfortunately, something in IT, which is by many businesses almost expected, just that humans are available all the time, 24/7. Whenever something is going wrong, you have to get up and fix it, whatever. That won't end well. So it's really important to take care of yourself and learn to say no in a nicer way, whatever, right? Set expectations and make sure there's enough time aside for yourself to keep a low profile for a little bit and relax and don't burn out. That is an impact that will go through a long time period with yourself. So take care and prevent burnout, basically. Yeah.
Love it. And I cannot thank you both enough for coming on here, sitting down with me and sharing your insights with us today and your experiences. But before I let you go, I'm going to have a bit of fun with you now and ask you to leave everyone listening by sharing something else with us all. And that is either a book that has inspired you or maybe a favourite song that we can add to our Spotify playlist. Whatever it is, what would you like to leave everyone listening with today? And Crystal, I'll let you answer this one first, and no pressure.
Well, I think my favorite song generally is Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. So that's kind of cliche, and I'm not gonna I'm not gonna leave with that. I think the book that has inspired me the most in the last couple of years is the Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes, which is not about tech, but I applied it to my job. It came at a time for me whenever I transitioned, just after I transitioned to this role, which is very different from my previous work. And it was just so inspiring to just take a moment. And as I said, like, try anyway, right? Do say yes to things that you may not have said yes to before out of fear or something else, right? I think that book was just so interesting to me about what would happen. What would happen? What's the worst that can happen if you say yes and do a thing? And there are drawbacks to doing that, of course, but I think that has been the most inspiring thing to me, to say yes to myself sometimes, because I think that is part of it. As Sasha mentioned, burnout is a real problem, and boundaries are a thing that are very important at work as in personal life. And I thankfully never had to learn that lesson. I definitely already know that, and I have no problem enforcing that. But I think that book, when I read it, at the time that I read it, it was just so interesting to me. I wrote a whole blog post about it because I translated some of the lessons that she told in her book into my new role and into my previous roles in tech. So I'd love to hear more people's stories in general about their inspirations from tech stories or non-tech stories.
Awesome. Well, I'll get that added straight to our Amazon wish list for listeners to check out. And finally, Sasha, the pressure's on you now. What are you going to leave everyone listening with?
Okay, my taste in music is a bit particular, so I save you from a bad link in Spotify. But one of my favorite books is actually Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I read it a couple of times in the past 30 years or whatever. Oh, I'm so old. It's fun to read and has a simple core message: have your towel and don't panic. I love it.
Oh, me too. And it also has the secret to the universe too, as well, doesn't it?
But, yes, the number. Yes.
And for everyone listening, for anyone that would just like to find out more information about you, connect with you, can contact your team, what's the best starting point for everything SolarWinds?
The best starting point for everything SolarWinds is probably just go to solarwinds.com. We have loads of information there, not including the salesy stuff, but there's also all of our documentation, which is very well put together. I don't have a hand in it, but they do a great job. Having used it for many years, they do a great job. For me personally, you can find me on Twitter at CrystalT87.
And one more thing, we also have a pretty amazing community. It's called thwack.com. And it's where you find 150,000 IT professionals who are somewhat experienced with SolarWinds. So if you have a question, most likely someone replied to it already. It's a great space.
That's right. You don't even have to be a customer to have an account there. It's completely free, and it's a lovely community.
Well, I'll add links to all of that to the blog post associated with this episode so people can connect and find out more information. But more than anything, just a big thank you, Crystal and Sasha, for coming on here, sharing more about this new solution and other exciting initiatives from SolarWinds, and more than anything, bringing it all to life with your personal stories and 2 great books too. So thank you, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome. Bye.
So I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Crystal and Sasha as much as I did today about some of those exciting initiatives that they have planned there, and just for bringing the entire topic to life. But you've heard from me today and you've heard from today's guest, but I want to hear more about what resonated with you. Did it spark any inspiration? Is there any insights or experiences that you'd like to share? All you got to do is email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok at Neil C. Hughes. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. I'm the easiest guy in the world to find, and I'd love to carry on this conversation with you. But if you don't have anything you want to share, I will simply cordially invite you to join me again tomorrow, where we've got another guest and another industry to dive into. So, a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.